Want the freshest cup of coffee in Gettysburg? Then visit 82 Cafe at 82 Steinway Avenue. They roast all of their coffee in-house and have a full coffee bar to keep you caffeinated during your visit. Check them out at www.raggededgerc.com for their menu and shipping options and their freshly roasted coffee. Use promo code Hancock for 10% off your order. That's 82 Cafe at 82 Steinway Avenue across from the Dobbin House or raggededgerc.com.
Audiobook narrator Mike Scott. Narrator of Savis Beattie's Bloody Autumn, the Shenandoah Valley campaign of 1864, and Unlike Anything That Ever Floated, the Monitor and Virginia and the Battle of Hampton Roads. If you are an author or publisher interested in having your titles produced as audiobooks, or even just in learning more about the process, give me a shout. You can find my contact info on my website, MikeScottVoice.com. That's MikeScottVoice.com.
The 1863 civilians of Gettysburg were reluctant witnesses to the Great Battle. Join Ken Rich, the man in the red shirt, for his historic town walking tours. You could book these tours by emailing ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. That's ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. And when you're in town, look for the guy in the red shirt.
And Civil War Trails. It's the world's largest open-air museum, and they offer over 1,300 sites across 6 states. Drive the Gettysburg campaign turn by turn, paddle to Frederick Douglass's birthplace, or hike to remote earthworks and artillery positions. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure and explore their interactive map. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg's Ask a Gettysburg Guide, a special anniversary edition. It is the 159th anniversary of the Gettysburg Address. You might be familiar with it. And today we've got our buddy Fran Feyock in here. How you doing, Fran?
I'm good, sir.
And you, this was your idea to do this show.
Well, I told you that I've listened to your anniversary speech, and I said we need to do a better job. So I asked you if I could put together some experts, people that I've met along the way that I've seen talk about this address, and they're here today.
And who would you bring along?
I brought licensed battlefield guide Doug Douds. He's here with us. He can introduce himself and tell you what he does. And my friend Jared Peatman, who's written a book that you have in front of you.
That's right, I do. We'll get to that in a second there. All right, go ahead. So, Doug, how are you doing? Welcome to the show.
I'm very good. Thank you for having me.
Your first time on.
Yes, sir.
But you're a huge fan.
I do listen to it all the time.
Oh, you do, really?
I do.
Oh, I was being sarcastic, but there you go. Okay, good. Glad to have you aboard. And you're a licensed battlefield guide?
I am.
How long have you been a guide?
Since 2014.
2014. Okay. So, and I'm assuming you're liking it so far?
Yeah, I love it.
Okay, good. And so is this your area of expertise here, or just one of many?
One of many, but one of my jobs while I was still in the Marine Corps was I was the senior speechwriter for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs.
Oh.
So literally over my computer was Lincoln, not Everett, as I try to write remarks for the chairman.
Yeah. So you wrote a note to yourself, think Lincoln, not Everett. Right. Short and concise, but poignant and powerful.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. And how did you do? Did you?
I made it, so I lived to tell about it, and I got another job, so that's all good.
All right, good. And then Jared Peatman, welcome. So here's the book here, Bob, if you want to go back to that. Bob Steenstra is doing Eric's job back at the cameras there. So, and he literally just got thrown on the spot there, and so far he's doing a good job here. The Long Shadow of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address by Jared Peatman. Hello, Jared. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. And so this is a pretty thick book about a speech. Like, that's pretty interesting that you could get that much into it, huh?
I didn't take Doug's advice. No, I went for the Everett approach. So,
all right. Well, and so just real quick, what's the book about?
It started off as my dissertation, and I started with this idea that a lot of people had written about the ideas that went into the speech, and a lot of people had written about what happened in Gettysburg that day and the couple days around it. But not many people had looked at the ideas that came out of the speech. And so I was more interested in the long-term impact, the ways the speech has been used and abused and interpreted and invoked. So there's chapters on the World Wars and how it was used during that time period, Civil Rights Movement, Cold War era, and a few others as well. And it ends, I usually don't tell people this, Matt, but I'm going to tell you, it ends with a discussion of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Of course it does.
Yes, it does.
A discussion on it.
Yes. most accurate Gettysburg Address scene of any Hollywood movie out there.
You're kidding?
No, I'm serious.
So now I got to watch it again.
Yeah.
I saw it once and I was like, this is silly, but now I got to watch it again.
Yeah, my wife came down one day. It wasn't in my dissertation, but when I did the re-edits for the book, I put it in, and she came down one day at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was watching the movie, and she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Research." So, yeah.
That's interesting, though, that a movie like that you would not think has any accuracy in it, you know? Because, I mean, if I recall, don't the Confederates turn to vampires at Pickett's Charge or something like that?
That sounds accurate.
Yeah, something.
Fortunately, I don't remember much of the movie at this point, but just there's the final scene, which, again, is maybe the only accurate thing in the whole movie. So,
oh, now I got to revisit that there.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And then, like I said, Bob is in the corner there, what am I trying to say? Working the cameras. And, Bob, the audience misses you, you know. People say, is Bob ever coming back? Are you going to have Bob on again? And I'm like, it's not my decision. He told me to F off. That's what he said.
Oh, I think
COVID
had something to do with it.
Well, yeah. But during that time, you did tell me to F off a couple times when we were arguing about COVID.
When we were arguing about politics and things like that.
There you go.
We are an example, Matt, of how good friends can disagree politically and maintain a friendship.
That's absolutely right.
We as Americans all need to
do. We should go on the road.
As the country was designed.
Yeah, exactly. We should go on the road with it and argue with each other on stage and then hug at the end.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, I don't know. I don't go that far.
Yeah.
By the way, this would be a good idea for you. Tomorrow, when I go off on my historian tour for 7 hours, say, Bob, Lincoln, not Everett.
Make it a 6.5 hour tour. Lincoln, not Everett.
Matt knows that I have a tendency to be long-winded on tours.
Well, tomorrow's not my day, so I don't care how long you go.
Okay.
It's all right. All right. So we're not talking about necessarily the dedication ceremony. We're talking about the speech itself.
It's your show, buddy.
No, that's what we're talking about, right? All right. That's the impression I've been under. Yeah. And I love this speech. It's a great speech. Where do I have it? I have it right here. Keep it right here in case I ever need to just pull it out and start speaking. You know, I have nothing to say. I'll pull this out and I'll just go into the Gettysburg Address. But it is, to me, I think, beautiful. It's the only political speech I've ever read or heard read over and over again that always gives me chills and puts a lump in my throat. Why do you think that is, Jared Peatman?
Well, I think it talks about, and this is why you still read it all these years later, it talks about universal themes, right? Things that are bigger than a particular moment. It's, part of the whole Lincoln, not Everett. Everett's speech is great at the time, but it's very grounded in that moment. It's all about the generals, the town, the battle. And frankly, as soon as there's a better history out there, why would you read Everett again? Right. Lincoln, it's these universal ideals that still persist and stick with us 159 years later. And that ultimately is why someone like you still gets chills.
So for the last 2 years, I've had Patrick Gorman from the movie. He played General Hood. I had him read it once, and the last 2 years I've released it on the day, and I just changed the background noise or music or whatever. And this year I said, let me try to do it myself. And first of all, it's funny because we all learned it in 5th grade and had to memorize it, and we all use the same tempo and inflection in our voice on certain words. But if you really read it and pay attention to the words, what he's saying, I think most people read it wrong. Not that I read it right. I just think most people read it wrong. And I don't know, that's what it's a fascinating speech to me. I don't know why.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question. Where should the emphasis be? We worked with Jim Getty for a long time, as many people did, a fantastic Abraham Lincoln and interpreter, living historian. And one of the things that he would do when reading the Gettysburg Address that I thought was so good was when he got to the end and that line, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Many folks emphasize the of, by, and for whatever reason. And Jim would always emphasize the people part of it, which I think is wise. And when you think about, what is the message Lincoln is trying to deliver? Which words would he have emphasized in person? It's worth thinking about that part too.
I think, didn't Sam Waterston emphasize people too in the museum here?
I believe so.
Yeah. And you're right. Well, I remember the first time I heard that, it didn't sit with my ears right because I'm used to hearing people emphasize the of and the by and all that. Yeah, but you're right. And I think he would. The people, not the of and the for and the by.
Right.
Doug, all right, so now you're a speechwriter.
Was, yes.
Was. Well, once a speechwriter, always a speechwriter, right? What are your thoughts on the Gettysburg Address?
So I agree. It's universal themes. Moreover, you think about this as done in the middle of the war. We usually think Gettysburg Address after Gettysburg, but it's not. It's after Chickamauga. It's actually after a massive loss. So the idea that he's dedicating this after a massive loss, there's still uncertainty on how this all turns out. So the idea that he paints these universal themes but leaves out union, slavery, it now goes beyond the time it was spoken.
Right.
To be universal, as you say, but not just universal to all people on the earth, but it's also to all people in all conditions and all times. It goes back as well as forward. So it becomes timeless, all in the same word, because of how he uses his language.
Yeah. So you're saying Everett gave a very long history of. Did he just do the I never actually read his.
It was it's the causes of the war as well.
Okay,
he
so
talks
the
about
war,
the secession crisis, and other things too.
Okay, but he doesn't go all the way back to our fathers brought forth on this continent.
He teases with it.
Yeah,
he does, but he doesn't work his way all the way up from there.
It is mostly a history of the battle, but he does sort of give the context of the nation, the war up until that point. It's interesting what the Southerners that read the speech in the aftermath really take issue with is and it's kind of a theme Lincoln had picked up too. He's saying both that secession is illegal and that most people in the South hadn't supported secession. Everett is making that argument within the early part of his Gettysburg Address. And then he's also talking about how once the war began, that Britain has been littering the seas with pirates by allowing the Confederates to build warships over there. So they're ticked off as well. So he's managed to offend just about everybody in the speech that he gives. Lincoln stays to a little bit safer ground in some ways.
Yeah.
He was a politician.
He was.
But why do you think of all the speeches? Because, he's given really good speeches. He was a great writer. He had a great way of putting things succinctly and cleverly. There's a wit to what he says. Why do you think this one, above all others, is the one that we all remember? Is it because it's short?
I think it's because he wanted you to understand it. And if you go back with Cooper Union, his first inaugural address, he's stealing themes the whole way through. But it's a simple speech. And I always tell people on my battlefield tours, and even when I mentor at Toastmasters, he hits the theme with simple words. That's why we have people come to the battlefield. Why do you think they teach it to you in 5th grade? Because you can understand it. I think that in of itself makes it a masterful use of the language, where Everett was using words I can't even pronounce. I'm telling you, I read Everett Street twice, once with and once without Scotch. Don't get it. God love you.
Either way, you didn't get it?
Didn't
Scotch
get it.
Or without?
But that speech is so simple that when we have international visitors, Chinese, Israelis, people from Australia, we're always in that cemetery, and they get that speech. I'm just assuming, I don't know, Jared, Doug, it must translate well. It must translate well because everybody seems to go, they get it.
To your point, so it's Lincoln's use of language that he uses, for as educated as he had become as a politician, he uses single-syllable words. It's the same for his second inaugural.
Yeah.
Most of those are single-syllable words that even a toddler can understand. The idea that he takes these very complex ideas and puts them in a simple package that anybody can follow with a very simple theme of a past, a present, and a future. That's a storyline that even a child can understand with a once upon a time beginning. Had he started it with that?
Yeah.
And Toastmasters uses that all the time. Simple language. Using your voice to up and emphasize and de-emphasize words, and to have it organized, like you said, past, present, and future, A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, makes it easy to understand. So I think he's talking to the little kids, to the uneducated of the 1860s, to the highly educated of 1860s. I think that's what makes it kind of a clever and an awesome speech, and it still makes sense.
Yeah, see, I always kind of felt like he was talking to us more than them. Like he was for posterity, he's saying, this is what the war is about. This is why I'm prosecuting this war to the fullest extent I can. Because it's not about yesterday. It's not even about today. It's about tomorrow.
It wouldn't take much for us to go, what's the great task remaining in the unfinished work in our time?
Yeah.
Every generation since then has had that same charge.
Right. So it's specific, but not specific enough where it only works in the Civil War. Everybody can use or abuse it.
Yeah, and we, us, and our stick to us all. It's brilliant in its generalization, but we would all internalize it to see what is the great work still needing to be done to make this a more perfect union in our own time.
Right. So for somebody listening at home right now who maybe doesn't have it memorized or isn't too familiar with it or is like, what the hell are these guys talking about? Like, can we break it down? You want to break it down? So I'll read a part of it, and then we'll stop, and then tell us what is he saying? Translate it into modern, stupid people English, okay? All right, 7 years ago. I mean, really, we're going elementary here.
I think you need to read the whole first sentence.
Okay, fine. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
This is the essence of all of it. So the Gettysburg Address is 272 words in the final version. There are 5 versions. We can talk about that later.
Yeah, I want to talk about that.
10 sentences. This is the opening sentence. It's also its own paragraph, and it's about the past. And so 2 things sort of tell us how Lincoln is trying to reorient the country. The first is that open. So 7 years ago. You've read it 1,000 times. Have you ever done the math?
87.
87. So what's he taking us back to?
The founding.
Okay, keep going.
July 4th,
Declaration. Okay.
1776.
And so the reason that's so important, right, is because in Lincoln's day, people, if you asked what the founding was, people might have said 1787 in the Constitution.
Okay, gotcha.
People might have said 1776 in the Declaration. Most people would have said 1787 in the Constitution. Lincoln is saying, no, we had been around for 11 years before that. The Constitution is actually our second form of government. It replaced the Articles of Confederation.
Right.
What Lincoln is saying, what Lincoln has come to believe is we began as a nation with a great vision, and then he tells you what that vision is in the last half of that sentence you just read. We began as a nation with the Declaration by declaring that all men are created equal. The problem is we've lost our way. We have started compromising. The Constitution's a compromise. The compromise of 1820, of 1850, we have bargained our way to where we've lost our way. What Lincoln is saying is not, we need a new vision. We need to recommit to that founding vision that we have strayed from. That's what the whole opening is all about.
And he's not a fan of the Constitution because it lets that peculiar institution of slavery, and he's not a fan of it. And there's 10 sentences, 10 things in there that allow slavery. And he kind of starts by stating, like, it's kind of the slap. I always say it's the slap in the face. Wake up. You guys know what's going on here. How did this country start?
But it is interesting if he goes there, because if we start with the Constitution, to your point, there's 3 references to slavery. Another under the word slavery. It's always persons of labor or persons of service. If we think about that, compromise has held that at bay. But really, it's the Constitution that lights the fuse that 73 years later explodes in the American Civil War. And Lincoln goes, no. He almost is referencing the mystic's chords of memory that grinded us all together. Before that, we had this unique vision of all the earth. And it is, in fact, that all men or all people are created equal, which also brought in his next war piece from preserve the Union to emancipate the slaves. This is now the third piece, because now we're going to take it to go, these apply to everybody on earth for all times. I think he redefines the war. How do we take military tactical activity on a battlefield and translate it to a strategic impact? This is what I think he's trying to do, and it starts with that.
And before Gettysburg, it was save the Union. From Cooper Union, first inaugural, I'm here to fight the Union. He makes that statement. If freeing all the slaves would preserve the Union, I'll do it. If keeping them all in slavery, I'll do it. But I don't know. I always tell people on the battlefield, something has changed in Lincoln from Gettysburg and Vicksburg to November 19th. Something has flipped him around, that it's not making sense anymore, that we're just an economic group of people. And I think that's what he's starting to get to.
You mean fighting for a union, it's not making sense anymore?
I just think fighting for that economic arrangement between the states is not worth all the death and destruction that he's seeing. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, so I think there's a step before this. So we do have in the beginning, it's preserve the Union. But already by 1862, realize this isn't going to be enough.
That's right.
This is when we come up with emancipation. So if you think about it, up until that point, really the war is not binary. We could have preserved the Union. The South could have come back in, preserved slavery within the states that had already existed. At the Emancipation Proclamation, now the war is binary. One of the other sides is going to be destroyed forever for having gone down this road. I think he's now getting to this next point of it. Look, we aren't just talking about principles from our founding fathers. These now apply to all humanity across all the earth. This is why this great experiment, we'll see in later lines, should this keep going? Because if it doesn't exist here, it won't exist anywhere.
Right. Okay. Next sentence.
Matt?
Yes.
Sorry. Over here.
Hey, Bob.
Gallery.
Yeah.
Lincoln reads Euclidean geometry. Did you hear that in that first sentence? Because we'll hear it later, too.
I don't even know what the hell that is.
There's a proposition that's going to be tested and proved.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay? So I don't know if you want me to come in with that now, but I also want to ask, I don't want to step on anyone's feet, but is anyone going to be talking about the cornerstone speech in comparison to this?
We could, now that you brought it up. Let's finish this, and then we can get into that.
Well,
yeah. Okay.
I don't want to step on anyone's toes.
No, that's fine. That's a good idea. All right. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure.
First of all, testing. Like you test a theory in geometry to see if it is true.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the proposition that all men are created equal is being tested in this war.
Whether that nation that was founded on, got it. Okay, gotcha. All right. Jared?
I think this goes back to Doug's point just a second ago, this idea of if this experiment with democracy fails after less than 100 years, 75 years, what chance does democracy have around the world? And so that is where our Civil War is so important around the world. Sometimes I think we give it too much importance. There are 177 other civil wars around the globe during the 4 years of ours. The Taipei Rebellion, 6 million people are killed. But in that broader sense of what might the future of democracy be if America falls apart, that is really the big sort of test here in that long endure piece. That's part of what's going on.
And for the first time, he slips in there, whether that nation or any nation. Now, all of a sudden, we've moved from, hey, I'm not just talking about this little piece of earth that we have right now. Now it's starting to take on the universal themes you brought up earlier.
And I'll just ask, now that I know you're a speechwriter, and it's the perfect way to get an audience to pay attention. He starts with like a question. He's not telling. It's like if you went into Top Gun and said, "Hey, at the end, Maverick is going to survive and Goose is dead," you wouldn't watch the movie. It's a perfect hook to an audience of 15,000 and somebody reading the paper because it challenges. It doesn't insult their intelligence.
Right.
It kind of says to them, "Well, yes or no." So I think whatever he is, he's a masterful speechwriter. What do you think, Doug? You wrote speeches. You always start with questions, kind of.
He's unmatched, I think. Everybody is trying
to be Lincoln. Absolutely.
And failing.
Yeah.
But it is still the goal.
Did we have any presidents who came close?
Well, I mean, Ronald Reagan was a wonderful communicator. Barack Obama was always incredibly intelligent and lucid when he spoke. I mean, we've had good speakers, without a doubt.
But what about JFK? What do you think of him?
Yeah, so there's a mix, though, because the interesting thing is JFK was powerful presence, and he has this magnetism about him, and that helps him deliver.
Sure.
Lincoln doesn't have any of that.
No.
I mean, he's ugly, he's goofy, he's kind of gangly.
Got a lazy left eye.
He's a little bit of a mess, but when he speaks, his words carry all of it.
Right.
One more thing. I don't believe any of the other presidents you mentioned wrote their own speeches.
I was just going to say that. Did they? I think Reagan did once in a while, didn't he? Or parts of them or something?
I'm sure they all have a part that they go ahead.
Okay.
According to his secretary, John Hay, Lincoln would mull over a speech, and he'd write little slips of paper and shove them in his pocket. And then I guess one night he'd sit down and go, no, this, and he would rearrange it to get it into position. So he's got one of those minds that it's always working on something.
A lot of us geniuses do that.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. We are met on a great battlefield of that war, and that's obvious. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that nation might live. I mean, that's
really important, I think. So there was a book that came out about 2 weeks before mine. Martin Johnson wrote a book called Writing the Gettysburg Address. It's absolutely fantastic.
Okay.
I believe was a co-winner of the Lincoln Prize that year. But it really is about this process of writing the Gettysburg Address. And he makes a really compelling circumstantial argument for Lincoln touring the battlefield on the morning of November 19th, very early, touring the first day's battlefield, the area where Reynolds was killed. And we know that he had met with Reynolds. He'd offered Reynolds command earlier. And he's so moved by that experience that he comes back to the Wills house and tears off the second page that he had already written and rewrites the second page of the address. And some of the evidence we have are references like this reference to what they've done here. Not there, not somewhere else, but this idea that he's actually writing it sitting in the Wills house. And so, again, I just think it's important because the ability of place to impact the emotion and what somebody puts into it, that may look like an innocuous sentence, but it is one of the small pieces of evidence.
And he's going to use here 8 times through the speech, like here, right where you're standing, right here, take a deep breath, right here. Something's changed.
Yeah, I never really thought about that aspect of it. So maybe that's one of the other things that makes it pretty special, is that it's actually about a specific place and event, and he's giving it there not too long after it happened. Okay.
The other thing to keep in mind is ultimately when he gets his invitation to make a few appropriate remarks, that's actually his task. There's an oration, but his responsibility is to dedicate the ground.
Right, okay.
So we'll see dedicate or dedicated some 6 times listed in there because that's functionally why he's supposed to be there.
Makes sense too, okay.
And that sentence also leaves it opened. Read the last one. If that nation shall live, it's in question. He's doing the
that might
Euclidean geometry, I guess. Now that I got it, will that work?
That nation might live. Yeah, like that it might have a chance. And then it is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this is the next sentence. Anything on that?
Yeah. So if we take, I would argue. So we know he's here with his stovepipe hat on, but I would argue he takes 3 roles. The first one is a normal citizen going back in time 7 years. So this is all of us as citizens. But now he's there as the commander-in-chief.
Yeah, he's a leader.
Well, and you think about his preparation for this, when he's down at the soldiers and sailors' home in the summertime, he's right across from the only national cemetery. That's where everybody's being buried. By the summer of 63, there's almost 5,000 people buried there. We won't start Arlington until 1864. This has already been weighing on his mind as someone who feels responsible for this as the commander-in-chief. I think he's wearing that commander-in-chief hat when he takes that line.
Right, okay. And he says we. So
we, us, and our 15 times.
Yeah. So, but he's part of the party is what I'm saying, right? Like he's not just somebody down in Washington saying this is what you're doing or this is what the government is doing. We are doing this. Yeah. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate. We cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow this ground. Should I go to the next one, or do you want to do something on that?
Just the one thing I think you could say about the word consecrate, it's not that in common use today, but it's one of the words that comes from the King James Bible. And so when you talk about the influences upon Lincoln, and especially with the language, that's one of those places where you see that word. It's one of the few words that to readers today is maybe not that common. It's not one of those 190 monosyllable words, but to people in Lincoln's day, they're reading the King James Version of the Bible daily. This is a word that they
would recognize.
They know. Yeah.
But also, though, we talk about this on the show a lot. I've done 2 shows called Why Gettysburg. And I invite the listeners to send in recordings explaining why they're so obsessed with Gettysburg. What draws them? Why Gettysburg over Manassas or Fredericksburg or anywhere else? And a few people will give a very literal answer, like, well, all these roads lead into Gettysburg, and whatever. So to them, that's what that question means. I don't tell them what I mean by why Gettysburg. I just throw it out there and then let them answer it. But most people say something spiritual. I went here for the first time, and I don't know what happened to me. It grabbed me. And this is what I always say, and other people say the same thing. And I often... I don't go to church. I believe in God. I don't go to church. But when I need that spiritual lift that people go to church for sometimes, I go sit on the battlefield. And I sit in the middle. You too, Fran?
Yeah, with a cigar.
Yeah. Well, sometimes with a cigar, yeah. But I'll and I don't just sit there in my car. To me, that's sterile. It's on the pavement. I'll get my chair or a gum blanket or something, and I'll go sit in the middle of a field. And sometimes I might, if I really need it, I'll bring a book and I'll read about what happened where I'm sitting. And I remember that these guys are half my age, a lot of them, most of them. And the ones that died, I mean, this was it. Far from home, far from their family, far from people who love them. And, sometimes I'll gaze up at the sky and imagine that cloud floating over my head is the last thing I see before I take my last breath. And for some reason, that makes me feel closer to God by coming here to a place where a bunch of people died in a horrific way. So to use the word consecrate, and I know what it means because I went to Catholic school and we, like crap. But it does make sense to me because to so many people to this day, this is a church. This is a sacred place on the altar of Americanism. You know what I mean? This is where all this but I mean, the whole war is full of places where all these sacrifices were made. But for some reason, this one is like the Vatican of them all.
You might be holding the reason why in your hands. The Gettys. That's part of the question, right?
That's what I'm saying, though. I think this is it.
Yeah.
This is the Sermon on the Mount, if you will.
Yeah.
So if you take that too, I love the idea you brought up about the King James Bible, and it's powerful because if we use it, then all the associations for which everybody knew that word, those all flood into their mind without him having to say it.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about, there is no greater gift than to lay down your life for another.
Yeah.
Well, now you just took why you're in the field. To give your life for some greater cause bigger than yourself, there is no greater. That's consecrated the ground. He's now tapped into that whole line of thinking. He doesn't have to say it. He can just use one word.
Right. So with that one word, all these things flood into your brain, and it's very smart. It's manipulative, but in a good way.
It's brilliant.
It is brilliant.
And I think, to this point, though, it is the reason he is there. This is essentially a funeral eulogy, that he is delivering. He is there to honor, the estimate is there are maybe 1,000 fresh graves around him at the time. We know ultimately 3,512. But, that is kind of foremost here. And again, that does go to the structure, I think, as well. In order to honor and make the sacrifice in the present meaningful, we've got to have a better future. And to have a better future, we've got to remember where we came from in the first place.
Yes.
And that's what Lincoln is starting to get to in this middle part here, right? So we started off with the past. Now we're in the present. And by the end, he'll go to the future. What does this look like going forward?
The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. There's the word again, consecrate. Their blood has consecrated the land.
When I do it, I emphasize the word have, contrasting to the we. I like the way you emphasized that when you did that last sentence.
Yeah.
We cannot consecrate.
No, we can't.
So it has also this piece in there of living and dead, which is interesting because if we think about it, the last wounded are still there from Camp Letterman, the largest field hospital in the country. Mm-hmm. So they would have been at the right of they would have had the position of honor. So you would have seen not only the graves, but also the wounded would have stood there who were still alive, who had also sacrificed some part of themselves on that battlefield. It's a recognition of who the audience is real time and for all the people that were going to read that in newspapers.
So the brave men, living and dead, is not just referring to the ones who are still with the army unscathed. It's also the wounded too. It's everybody, living and dead.
Do we know, did he point? Could he have pointed to those Letterman?
If he was a battlefield god, he would have. 2 fingers.
Oh,
supposedly those soldiers are sort of moved or pushed, right up front near the stage. The most interesting one of them, in my mind, is a guy named Calvin Hamilton. So Calvin Hamilton is from Gettysburg. He enlists in Company K of the 30th Pennsylvania, the 1st Reserves, marches off to war. He is on Little Round Top. He makes that charge with the Pennsylvania Reserves about the same time the 20th Maine is making their charge a little bit further to the south. He's wounded. He's one of, I believe it's 8 men that are wounded from that company. He's left behind in Gettysburg to recover, and he hears the Gettysburg Address. So he's from Gettysburg. He fights in the battle. He fights in the war. He hears the Gettysburg Address, and then he becomes the superintendent of the cemetery in the, I believe it's the 1890s, and he's buried in the cemetery. So it's this one person that links together all of these different pieces.
Yeah.
Where is he buried?
It's plain as day. You can see it if you're standing where the big monument is, right?
The Soldiers' National
Monument, and you go back past the main plot, sort of in that direction.
So he's in the Pennsylvania plot.
No, he's not in the Pennsylvania plot.
Okay.
Because he's post-war. He's not killed in the
I've seen him. He's not right out the circle.
Yeah, so he's got a tombstone that is about chest high, a couple feet across, and you could see Hamilton written.
He's by our Medal of Honor winner. He's by the Medal of Honor winner.
Yeah, he is.
Exactly.
Very cool.
And the other thing,
So it's those few that are still in the area where the semicircle is.
Yeah.
It's not across the road. It's right.
Still
I know
so
where-
he's just down a little bit from where the unknowns or the more recent unknowns and the parts are buried. He's a few graves down.
Okay, gotcha.
and the other thing that Lincoln is starting to do here, he's continuing to hook the audience. Everybody comes to any type of thing with their own background. But everybody has experienced love and hate and loss and pain and suffering and sadness and sorrow. We're all connected by those common experiences.
Yeah.
Lincoln is doing, you know what? He has set the hook now. He's pulling it hard and starting to reel that audience in. I imagine everybody's getting quiet now because they're going, oh my God, I can see it, just like you do when you sit on the battlefield.
Yeah. But Bob, to your point about have consecrated it, though, I like that you caught that because I agree. Like, he's saying they've done it.
Yeah.
We're not doing it.
We can't do this.
Yeah, they already did it.
And the next sentence, right?
We're just recognizing that they have done it already.
Right. The world will little note.
Well, yeah, let's get to that here. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. Go ahead. One of you.
So it's a bit of a fib if he does his job right.
Right? It's like the humble brag, right?
It is.
Yes, it's a humble brag.
Hey, and granted, what they did here, that's what everybody should remember. But let's face it, we were talking earlier about having taken people from all around the world around the battlefield. They don't have a clue what they did out on the battlefield.
Right.
But if you get them close to Lincoln's, where he gave his address, they'll know it either in part or full. So it actually gets flipped on his head. He is appropriate for the time, but if he does his job right, that line shouldn't actually hold true.
And it really isn't a humble brag, though, because he thought it stunk, right? Like afterwards?
I would dispute that.
Oh, okay. We'll get to that later then. Yeah. All right. Oh, good. Some controversy. Okay. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. Go ahead. Anything on that?
Yeah, that unfinished work, most of the soldiers would have told you in 1863 it's the restoration of the Union, right? That's what these guys have signed up for. So it is that combination of the restoration of the Union, but Lincoln, as Fran sort of alluded to earlier, he is now, I don't think it's that Lincoln changes his mind, but he now thinks the public is ready to hear a more expansive message. The public is now ready to hear a message that is about going beyond just what we had in 1861, actually having something better. And so this unfinished work is restoration of the Union, but not just back to that antebellum status quo, this better Union that doesn't have slavery at its core, and more than that, has equality. That's how he's opened at the beginning of the sentence. Now, again, we could, dicker over what exactly he means by equality, right? But moving in that direction, that is the purpose of the speech. So that is the unfinished work part that he's starting to move us towards.
And he's telling the crowd, time for action.
Yeah.
He's charging them with time for action.
Moreover, I think if we take this idea that if we start with the unfinished work it's always activity. This is also one of those timeless lines that we can pull to our time. But this idea that they have so far nobly advanced, this idea that all people are created equal, well, it's also we the people in order to create a more perfect union. If you think about that line, it's goofy on its surface where you go, what can be more perfect than perfect? It's always being perfected and refined.
You'll never get there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is the unfinished work that they have so far nobly advanced as well.
Getting a little bit closer to more perfect, but never going to be perfect.
I just hope all you guys on this know that I am stealing this stuff and adding it to my cemetery wall. Just so you know, Barb, your stuff too. I got to find out what Euclidean geometry is.
Yeah.
I just wish I was like Doug, smart enough to have brought a pen and a little thing.
You want some paper and a pen, Bob? I'll give you a paper and a pen, or crayon and construction paper. What do you want?
Get to the next part, Matthew.
Sorry.
Matthew.
Yes. Well, when he's mad at me, I'm Matthew. Okay. So, let me ask you this, though. January 1st, right? The Emancipation Proclamation goes in effect. I'm imagining, I've heard, not very popular, right?
As popular as he was a president.
What? Say that again?
As popular as he was when he was first elected.
Okay. All right. Is this maybe his first high-profile chance to really say to everybody, here's why I'm doing this? Here's what we've been through, and it's got to be something higher than Union.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would argue that the Gettysburg Address is almost the second half of the Emancipation Proclamation because the proclamation is done in his capacity as commander-in-chief, and he is limited in what he can do. And if he steps out of line and says, I'm doing this because it's right, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 1863 is Roger Taney. This is the guy that decides the Dred Scott decision 6 years earlier. And so he's got to be pretty careful. And if you look at the Emancipation Proclamation, it is very technically legal. He's using all that lawyer training, right, to do this. I think it bugs him. I think it bugs him that he's essentially taken this major step to end slavery, and he has sort of disavowed any morality, in the course of doing it. And now, 10 months later, this is kind of an unofficial capacity, right? He's invited here to speak, but this isn't state policy. This isn't a law, but he's putting that moral force behind it as well. And so, a lot of folks would argue, and I think it's correct, that you have to see them as kind of two parts of one whole.
And he's a year out from an election, too.
That's what I was going to ask, guys. I want to know your opinion. Do you think this is also the beginning of a political speech?
I don't know.
So
funny, that dawned on me when he was talking.
Only in the sense of, if you're looking at what his policy is going to be in 1864, it'll be to take the family watch, push it into the middle of the chips table, and we're all in to win this to make sure that I think this is the beginning of, I'm a candidate that will finish this. If we're going to sacrifice like this, the great task remaining is to finish this to ensure that we are a nation who we said we are. So I'm all in. We're family watch. It's the property. We're going, if you vote for me going forward, it's until this is done to get us back to those principal values for which our founding fathers founded.
I am so still in that.
Man, this speech is more brilliant as you parse it like this. Like, I'm just like, man, this guy's a genius.
And there's one piece. I don't know if I buy that, Doug. And I'm not with you. This argument's been made before. But the piece of evidence that supports you is the state of Ohio has arranged a political rally in the church, the Presbyterian church, that will occur after the Gettysburg Address is delivered. I believe, I'm going to get this a little bit wrong, but it's the governor-elect, and the lieutenant governor-elect. I mean, everybody who is currently serving and is incoming, all there. And Lincoln attends this rally, this political rally. It's the famous one where John Burns comes with him as well. That would maybe give some support to this idea that he is viewing his time in Gettysburg as a political opportunity looking ahead to 64 and not just as about this particular moment. I wonder sometimes if we are almost jaded by our late, or early 21st century politics of thinking they're campaigning 2 to 3 years ahead of time.
Yeah, as soon as they win the first election, they're campaigning for the next one.
When they didn't do that quite to that extent then. So
But could this be setting the stage for what his stump speeches and everything of the next year are going to be like
he's floating a trial balloon?
Yeah, kind of maybe, or maybe not that, but just basically, not even, this is what I'm going to be doing. Sure. This is it. This is where we are. I'm sick of the dead. I'm sick of this. We're going to end this, and we're going to do it right, and here's why,
I appreciate they push back. So I agree with you. He's a singular of focus. I think this is a second or third order effect of what he's saying. But to your point, if we use executive authority to go ahead and push out the Emancipation Proclamation, if you think about it, as he puts his moral fortitude behind this, effectively, you think about leadership, it's taking people where they can't go on their own. The legalistic document that is the Emancipation Proclamation isn't enough to move hearts and minds. But this part is now connecting this with a moral fortitude to go ahead and send it forward to going, this is where we're going to go. And if you think about him leading the will of the nation to that next point, I think maybe that's the connection in a second or third order effect.
Yeah. So it is like part 2 of the Emancipation Proclamation. It's the emotional part of it.
Maybe.
I don't know. None of us know.
And sometimes I think he's saying it out loud because he's been thinking about it since Vicksburg and Chickamauga. He's been thinking about it, and maybe this is a little bit of like, I'm now pulling myself up by my bootstraps. This is where
he's been thinking about it since the 1850s.
Easy.
He is invoking the Declaration since the 1850s. Right. It's just that now he feels like the public is ready for this message.
Yeah.
He stands about a foot in front of the people and tugs them toward him. He doesn't, tell people this is where we want to be 30 years from now. He doesn't think that's effective leadership. He stands right here and says, "Come this one step with me. Come one more step with me." And that's what he's doing now. That's the timing piece. I think it's his recognition that the public is now ready for this message. It's nothing about him personally seeing things any differently than he always has. It's just revealing more of it.
The spiritual and the political are not mutually exclusive, right? And he's always been keeping his party together, which wasn't easy. And one of the reasons he comes here is political because of rifts in the Republican Party, right? And there's going to be movers and shakers here. He's going to meet with them. So they're not mutually exclusive.
Sure.
I mean, if you're president, I don't think there's anything that you do that isn't political. Even back then.
Yes.
Well, everything was political. You're the president, you know?
But even more so for a person who deeply believes in the rightness of the cause, which I believe Lincoln was.
Oh, yeah.
So this gets into another interesting point about how this is evolutionarily grown. That even it was brought up at Vicksburg. You were saying so the 7th of July is his longest extemporaneous speech to a serenading crowd at the White House, for which he starts with what was it, 80 some odd years ago that our founding fathers put together, and it's even the language is already starting to be there. The elements are there; they're not crystallized to what we know it. But we're 4.5 months before this, and already he's trying to give this structure. I think it talks a lot about how
his mind.
A lot about how his mind works.
Okay. I can relate to that because, you get an idea for something and you got to mull it over. You know you're onto something, but you just don't have the details of it right. And so you just shut up. You don't tell anybody. You throw out little test balloons and, okay, that didn't really work. And, you tweak it. And then, you get that moment in time where this is the time to do it. I got to pull it all together. I've been thinking about this for months. Yeah. What a smart guy. All right. Where did we leave off with that one? It is rather for us to be here dedicated. Did I do that one? No, I didn't. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these, let's see, we got a lot of dashes here, so let's take it one at a time here. So let's go back to, it is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us. We've kind of talked about what that is. That from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. These guys gave everything, so we should do a little bit more. It's basically what he's saying, right?
So he moves from dedicating the land, which is backwards, what has already taken place, to now we need to be dedicated, again, to this great task moving forward.
Bob, were you going to say something that looked like you were ready to say something?
I was just shaking my head. I wish I had that pen to write what Doug just said down. Keep going.
Luckily, you'll be able to listen to this in a couple of weeks.
There you go.
With the pen.
With a pen, yeah. Make sure you have a pen with you. All right, so let's see. Full dimension of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. Pretty obvious, right? Anything?
Obvious, yeah. But again, it does go to that point. What gives the war purpose? I don't know how many men have died by the summer of 63, but 300,000 or more, right? So what is it that gives it purpose? And again, Lincoln is making this argument. Not enough just to go back to what we had in 1860-61. We ended up in a civil war. Got to have something better than that. And so it's this evolution, of the purpose. I guess in modern leadership they would call it the why, right? What's the why of what you're doing here, why you're doing it?
I also think it's a clever way to talk. I mean, imagine how a mother or a father felt.
Just gonna say,
my son was killed for no good reason.
Yeah.
And I think he's reaching out to them saying they have not died in vain.
Right.
That it
will mean something.
You may be thinking that, but that's not true.
I mean, at the time, what is the mood of the country towards the war? Are they war weary now, or are they getting war weary? Are they already weary?
I think there's kind of a question, right? Because you've had Gettysburg, you've had Vicksburg, but then you've had kind of bogging back down in the late
Chickamauga.
Chickamauga. But then even in the east,
draft,
you've
right?
had the all of the Mine Run campaign and all of that, which has not gone well. And has Gettysburg really turned the corner? I mean, we see that in retrospect. I'm not sure that they saw that at the time.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting here because if we're going to say that he's a citizen in the first piece, he's the commander-in-chief in the next, now he takes off the hat and he puts on the presidential hat. Now he's going to translate tactical activity into a strategic effect, and now we spring into the future because now we're resolving. This is about future activity This is all the things that haven't already been done. And so now I think as we transit from that past, present, and the future, he has a third hat on, and it's as the president that he's doing that.
Okay, so that we here highly resolve these days shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. Well, who's getting the new birth?
Well, there's an important part even before that, right? The under God piece is added extemporaneously while he's on stage.
So that wasn't written originally?
It's not written in the original
It's between
draft.
a verb if you look at it.
Yeah, and so it's it's just it gets to this idea of how is the speech constructed, and where do these ideas come from? But just maybe he's feeling the gravity of the situation, right, and adds that piece, and then he talks about
maybe he has what now they call the Matt syndrome, where this is where you meet God, where you feel God is here. Maybe he felt it. He was just like, oh, I don't know, under God, and he just threw it out there.
Sure,
who knows?
So the new birth of freedom also ends up being then, what does that more perfect union look like? It's an entirely new birth, different from what we imagined when the Founding Fathers said all men. They literally meant that. In fact, they meant all white men. We are now moving to
white men.
Yeah, we are now moving to all men is really all people are created equal universally across the world. We've now taken that step.
So yeah, because if they meant everybody, they would have said all man or mankind, not men, right? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're starting to translate a new birth of freedom means the expansive definition that you've just brought up.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm assuming, given what the whole war was really about, that he's talking about African Americans here, not everybody, because that's going to come later, but at least black people, black men, right? Ultimately,
yeah,
initially,
in the short term, but when you talk about equality, Seneca Falls is 15 years before this, the origins of the women's suffrage movement, and of course it started even earlier than that. So it does start on this path, right, towards a broadening expansion of equality. Lincoln is not the only one to be invoking the Declaration of Independence and the failed promises of the Declaration. 11 years earlier, Frederick Douglass had talked about this famous speech in Rochester on July 5th, 1852, what to the slave is the 4th of July. You'd seen at Seneca Falls, literally what the women at Seneca Falls do is they rewrite the Declaration, except all their grievances are the rights that they're being denied, right, by the government.
Instead of what the king is doing.
Yeah, exactly. And so this idea that we're already sort of moving towards what does equality mean, that new birth of freedom? Yes, in this particular context, what's at question is not women's suffrage. It is freedom for African Americans. And more than that, because when Lincoln gets back from Gettysburg, within a couple of weeks, he's writing private notes talking about voting rights for African Americans, right? He starts putting this kind of balloon out there to some of his confidants saying, what do you think about voting rights for those who have served? And this phrase is a little troubling, but he says, and the particularly intelligent, right? So he's starting to go beyond just an end to slavery, moving towards at least that political equality, if not civil equality. And so it is potentially even broader than we typically think of it with.
Right. So it's not just freeing them, it's making them citizens.
Yeah.
And Doug's point earlier where he said it's for all times, I don't think he realized that it should be expanded to women, Native Americans, people that come in from Ireland, people that have immigrated to the nation. He is setting the nation up to be that shining city on the hill.
Yeah.
All men are created equal, not just the ones that we select.
Right.
All men. I don't know. Do you guys think he was thinking that way, or you think he was just purpose on slavery? I don't think he's an abolitionist per se. I think he's seeing the broader picture that we're all created.
He's a humanist, maybe, right? Like he just sees we all have the same desires.
Right.
If you prick us, do we not bleed?
Yeah.
Of course. So
to Doug's point about the expansiveness, I think is the word you used. Kermit Roosevelt III, I don't know if you guys familiar with him. I just listened to a podcast, The World in Time, episode 94, if you want to listen to 38 minutes about
Bob, we don't plug other podcasts on the show.
Well, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just kidding.
He just marked that. That's going to be cut out.
Yeah, that's going out.
We'll edit that. That's bad. No.
Okay, no, go ahead.
But he was making that point that the revolution, he's talking about like deconstructing the myth of America's story. And the whole point that the revolution was not necessarily inclusive, it was more exclusive. It was for white men It was for us, we make a political agreement, and when you break that agreement, these are the reasons we can go against you, right? He said about 20 minutes in, something like the document that explains the new birth of freedom, if you will, he didn't use those words, was the Gettysburg Address. There's 3 different times he talks about the Gettysburg Address as being instrumental in this rewriting America's story. Mm-hmm. To be inclusive, not a group of white guys who are being put down upon by the king, who start a revolution so now we can have our way, but to include people.
Yeah. And I think the group of white guys had to get rid of the yoke of the king before anybody else could be freed, because they were the dominant group in the society. So that had to. But now, okay, it's been 87 years, and where are we? We still have slaves, and now we're going to blows over the question of whether or not people should be free or slave. To me, it's just, because I'm a product of the 20th and 21st century, it sounds ridiculous that you would even have an argument over that, but they did. So, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying.
Plus, in the more practical points of what are we resolved to do going forward, we think about that as fighting the war. There's also the idea of moving the will of the nation, because an executive order is not going to stand. Like, we're going to have to do 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th. That politically is going to have to get done if that's going to be the lasting effect for this new birth to work. There's other work to be done.
Yeah, a lot of work. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. And that last line always gives me the chills, because, well, I don't know why. It just does. But yeah, so go ahead about that one.
So that line becomes the inspiration for 2 what we would call constitutions, apart from, outside of the U.S. In 1912, the Chinese have thrown off the dynasties, and Sun Yat-sen goes to write, again, what we would call a constitution for China. He calls it the 3 principles of the people, and those principles are nationalism, sovereignty, and democracy. Sun Yat-sen had studied in Denver for a while, and he writes explicitly in his autobiography, I base these ideals on Lincoln's conception that a government should be of, by, and for the people. And then in 1958, when the French went to write a constitution for their 5th Republic, if you read that document, it says at the bottom of the first page, Son Principle A, government du people, par le people, et pour le people, government of, by, and for the people. That is still the Constitution in France today. It's held up 65 years later or so. And so, kind of interesting to think about, right? The Chinese, the French, 2 countries that we don't always get along with, and yet you see it all these
Jared,
years later.
I'm showing him the stamp.
There's a Chinese here. Bob, go to my camera here.
I got it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that,
Look at this,
that
ladies
one
and gentlemen.
is a stamp that the United States produces in 1942. It is produced to celebrate the 5th anniversary of our common ally, China, in the struggle against our shared enemy of Japan. My, how things have changed.
Yeah,
so
really.
you see on the one side, under Lincoln, you see of, by, and for the people.
Yep.
And then under Sun Yat-sen on the other side, those are the Chinese characters depicting nationalism, sovereignty, and democracy, those 3 principles of the
Very
people.
cool.
What's interesting, of course, is we know Republic of China gets driven out of China, and they take refuge in Taiwan. In 1959, on the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth, Taiwan will produce a stamp. This isn't us now saying, look how great we are. Taiwan produces a stamp that is almost identical to that one, but showing these connections between their government form, essentially, and Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address.
My, how times have changed, like you said. Like, that's crazy.
Plus, for a speech that has 15 references to we, us, and our, that we go, people, 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 that's we. That's us. That's our. It comes back to us, we the people, to create a more perfect union. And I think the last thing it does is that he stands on the physical high ground of Cemetery Hill. He now turns the rest of the world and puts the whole nation on a moral high ground for all the rest of the world to see that will this great experiment that is based upon the idea of people being free and masters of their own fate, can that survive? I think he holds it up to go, we are now stewards of this great
Go ahead,
nation.
Bob. Yeah.
I just was going to put the camera on for you.
All right, so now here, this is from Honduras.
That's the Honduras one. So 1959, you see there are about 120 countries in the world at that time. 90 of the 120 commemorate Abraham Lincoln's birth in some way or another, many through stamps featuring the Gettysburg Address. So that's one. And then if you go, I think the page adjacent is the Taiwan stamp. that I was just referencing a moment ago. Again, what's interesting here is this isn't us producing this, telling the rest of the world how great Lincoln was. This is the rest of the world producing these things, showing their appreciation for Lincoln. Now,
what happened since then where the rest of the world hates us now and we hate ourselves?
I don't talk about anything after 1965. So I can't answer that.
That's not his dissertation.
because it becomes interesting. In 1954, a place like Honduras is talking about these values. But if you go from 2006, we're on 17 years of democracy essentially backsliding all around the world, including in the United States.
Yeah.
So that 75% of the world's population are now under authoritarian regimes. That what we thought was the great experiment and that should translate to the rest of the world, that is now back in doubt. We are, again, the great task remaining in the unfinished work, we are now stewards of this experiment again to see whether or not those are indeed universal themes or not.
We need another Lincoln to write a speech like this to get our heads out of our asses.
This is the Liberty stamp for the Germans.
Yeah, so the reason that one's so interesting, I forget, is 1951. The reason that stamp's so interesting, it's actually a bell that was given by the United States to the Germans, to the people of West Berlin, I believe. And it's a replica of the Liberty Bell, but then around the bottom of it has this line, "A New Birth of Freedom," and it's called the Freedom Bell. So here's the irony. That stamp, that denomination of stamp from Germany, 10 years earlier, carried the likeness of Adolf Hitler on it. And now it's being replaced by the Liberty Bell, by the New Birth of Freedom. It plays into this larger thing. A little earlier, the stamp's a little bit early for that, but during the Cold War, especially when Eisenhower's president, Gettysburg resident here, and he's president of the United States, they see, and he sees in particular, Lincoln as a tool to try to win the Cold War. He sees Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address as a tool to try to persuade these other nations, this is the form of government you want.
Right.
And they literally will try to use Abraham Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address to sell democracy abroad. So I think that next...
And maybe to remind Americans, too.
A good point. Wouldn't hurt.
Yeah. Because, the Cold War, a lot of people were kind of siding with the commies.
Yeah, but you can't do propaganda on your own people. So the group that
you can't?
Well...
What are you talking about?
Well, let me rephrase. So the group that is doing all this is called the U.S. Information Agency, and they are explicitly and openly propaganda arm of the State Department.
Okay.
They are given $100 million budget, which is a lot of money in the 1950s.
Back in those days,
yeah. And so the thing that I think you're about to hold up in a second here is actually a comic book that they produce. It's about 30-odd pages. It's on the life of Abraham Lincoln. They translate that into a dozen languages of Southeast Asia in 1959, and they send out 100,000 copies. So I found a copy in the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library in Springfield, and there's a notation on the inside that they sent 32,000 copies of this to Saigon in 1959. They are literally trying to stop the dominoes from falling. They're trying to stop places like Vietnam from turning communist by invoking Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address.
But we shouldn't. So it's a really fascinating topic, but in the same sense that the Civil War generation are stewards feeling that they are responsible to the founding fathers to ensure this keeps going forward, the World War II generation, these are their grandfathers, great-grandfathers, in the same way that the Civil War generation looked at the
Revolution. Yeah.
The World War II veterans was a Civil War generation.
Yeah.
Right? This is why we have a blue and gray division. This is why you go to the cemetery over Omaha Beach and around the base of the statue in the cemetery it says, "Mine eyes have seen the coming of the glory of the Lord." This is the battle hymn of the Republic. They were a Civil War generation. That resonated with them because they felt they were stewards of it, and it was a story that then they felt, the rest of the world should know, whether that nation or any nation is so conceived and so dedicated.
And how many years had passed between those two generations? 40.
Yeah.
And we are now
We
are now 40 years past that generation.
Wow.
Yeah, and they say every 80 years or so, hell.
Well, Americans have a hard time getting along with each other about every 40 years.
So we could fake the funk for about 80 years, and then we realize we actually do hate each other, and we should never have tried this, and we go to blows.
Yeah.
Or with someone else in the world. And then we ignore our own problems till the 1960s.
I should put the camera on you, Matt.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
That's fine. You don't need to do that.
But that ending is simple and powerful. Toastmasters would tell you your ending of any speech has to be something that sticks and resonates with you as you're walking off the field. That's repetition.
Yeah.
Of the people, by the people, for the people.
But also there's a rhythm.
And there's a rhythm,
punch.
And it's pounding into your head.
Shall not perish from the earth.
That's right.
There's no uncertain terms. Shall not perish from the earth.
And I've tried reading it, taking just one of them, that the government of the people shall not perish from the earth.
Nobody cares.
Government by the people.
Forget it.
But it's that punch of boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
And then, if he could, drop the mic.
Now, which version is this that I read to you?
You're probably reading
the Bliss
version.
The Bliss version.
So there's 5 versions in Lincoln's own hand. The Bliss version currently resides in the White House. It's the 5th and final version that Lincoln writes out in March of '64. It is the reason that you have that in your hands right now is because when they're constructing the Lincoln Memorial, Congress has already published over 100 different versions of the Gettysburg Address.
Okay.
And when they're creating the Lincoln Memorial, they got to decide, what are we going to put on the walls here? And so they kind of start thinking about what an authorized version looks like. Robert Todd Lincoln's still alive. And Robert Todd Lincoln says, well, this is the one that my dad, would have wanted because it was, again, that final edition.
This one, the Bliss version, is the one?
So that's not what he said.
But I was going to say, what did he actually say? Which version is...
So the first version is what he actually said.
The Hay draft.
The Hay,
Nicolay.
okay.
Yeah, and so there are these... the first version, it's not really very different.
No, it's just a few phrases.
It's a few words. The meaning is the same. There's a few things... but nothing hugely significant different between them.
Is this a little more dumbed down, maybe?
Not at all.
No?
It's just slightly refined.
Okay.
And he signed
just
it.
Cleaned up.
It looks good on the Kentucky Memorial in the cemetery.
Yeah, so it's actually created to be reproduced in a book called Autographed Leaves of Our Country's Authors, which would be sold at the Baltimore Sanitary Fair. And he produced the first draft, and he did it front and back. And they said, hey, we can't reproduce this. He said, fine, I'll do another one. He did another one. It's actually 3 pages. And they were like, we can't do 3 pages. We needed 2. But they did dare ask him for another one. So whenever you see it reproduced, it's always on 2 pages, but they've actually kind of put it together. The original is on 3 separate pages. But
they didn't edit it at all. They just squeezed it into 2 pages.
Yeah. Just when you see those parchment paper things, they've taken the lines and they've put it on 2 pages.
Doug is a speechwriter. What do you think the difference is between Lincoln, this speech, but really any speech he gave that we have records of, and all the politicians that we all grew up with? Like, what is it because he wrote it?
So it's definitely in his own. He would have been comfortable giving it because it was in his own mind. Moreover, just like we were talking about Euclidean geometry earlier, because Lincoln had figured this out. It was in his own mind, so as we struggle to say what part you would emphasize, he would have had that part.
Sure, yeah.
The logic of it made sense in his own mind because he had nugged it, refined it, and made sure that it made sense to him, that there was this hard logic that would have appealed to a lawyer or to a mathematician, but also it would have been one that he could have delivered. I think modern politicians struggle with that, and also they see as every time I speak, I need to cure all the world's diseases at once. This is an effort at one small time to redefine the direction of the war. It's an inflection point, and in that time and space, that's what he uses it.
Well said.
My guess would be he meant this, and politicians today don't mean what they say because it's not even their words. And it's nothing against speechwriters. They're all, they're very good. I couldn't do it. But let me ask you this. When you wrote speeches for someone else, did you think, okay, well, I know what he believes and what he wants us to say, but what do I believe? Like, do you tap into your heart when you write it, or do you just do... What's the art like? Like, how do you do it?
So it's a mix. So first of all, you got to write in the principal's voice, or they're never going to give it.
Right.
But second, it's... I couldn't write if it didn't appeal to me. So I know what the boss thinks, true. But the examples that I use, the order that we put it in, how we get to a conclusion, how you do the setup, if it doesn't resonate to me or the small group of people around me, then I'm never going to take it to the boss. Because if we can't make it work for us, it'll never work for him.
Okay.
And a group that he's never met before, and we're around him all the time. So you're right to clarify it as kind of science and a lot of art.
Right. Okay. Because there's a formula that you learn in school or wherever you learn, right? There's a formula to do these things, but you got to fill it in with some. But there's always a lot of, and I don't know what speeches you've written, so I'm sure I'm not talking about yours. But like, there's always a lot of platitudes. It's always empty. They're empty, right? There's nothing there. But this has heart. This gives me chills.
Right. So there you go. We're at 13,000 words in an hour and 57 minutes. And can anybody remember what Everett said? No.
All time is the millennium of their glory.
Well, that's only because the Minnesotans put it on. But every one of those punches, every one of those words stands on its own. There's no slop in there. There's no, he didn't need to say that.
Yeah.
Everything in there holds its own, and it has to be in there or the rest fall apart.
And he edited it. Like, so, and you know how hard it is? So when you do this stuff or with film or video or anything like that, anything creative, they call it killing your babies. I'm sure you probably have heard that in your line of work too, right? You got to kill your babies. That's very hard to do. It's painful to do it because you're like, no, but this is such a good, but it doesn't work. We don't have time. We got to cut it, whatever the reason is, right? So he had to do that himself, which is, to me, astounding. Like, I that's hard to do.
Gentlemen, do you think he bounced it off of Seward and William Johnson? All of it, part of it? I mean, this is a big speech for him. This isn't the first time. I mean, I don't know how he works other than the pieces of papers, but he's got to have a sounding board, would you think? I mean, you just said you bounce it off a group of people.
Yeah, we know he walks next door from the Wills house and goes over to William Seward and talks with Seward for a little while and then comes back. So it seems likely, right, that he is sharing with him some of those, some of those ideas. They'd collaborated before. Collaborated is maybe not quite the right word, but the first inaugural, Lincoln writes, and then he sends it to Seward and says, "What do you think?" And Seward makes some suggestions. In fact, Seward's the one that comes up with the Mystic Chords of Memory line.
Mystic Chords of Memory.
But the version he gives Lincoln says, "Okay, I like it, but not quite that way." And then Lincoln edits it, and that's what eventually makes it into the first inaugural. But this is kind of typical of Lincoln's process, right?
Yeah.
He's taking some suggestions, but certainly nobody is writing it for him.
Plus, we have some other accounts. I think Ward Lemon talks about him sharing pieces of it during the writing, that the language starts to come out. And that becomes the other thing, too, that he does share it, because even as we read, we actually read with our ears. It sounds right.
Yes. It's poetic. It's lyrical. It's beautiful. And it's a political speech. I never would say that about any other political speech. Mm-hmm. It is beautiful. Well, maybe his inaugural addresses are beautiful too. I think they're pretty good. But okay, I would never say this about any other politician's speeches except for Lincoln's. And that's a real talent. Saturday we had our last Get Out of the Car tour. I don't know, the free tours we do every month during the season. And so it's the end of the year, give a couple of awards. One we gave to Louis Trott because he's been doing this for 3 seasons so far, and he's really into it, and he does a great job, and people love it. And then another one was to Eric, the producer, because he's moving, and he's therefore leaving the show. And so I tried to write a speech saying goodbye to Eric, and I tried to model it after this, not with the 4 score and all that crap, but where we came from and all that other stuff, and it just didn't work. So I said, well, let me just write. And so I started writing about his beard. He has a big bushy beard. I started about the beard, and then somehow got into sentimental stuff. It's hard to do. It's hard to do and make sense, and it's hard to weave in humor and sentimentality and fact and everything else. Like, it's an art to do it, and it's very hard to do. I think I'm the only one that got choked up from the speech. Not nobody watching or listening did, but I did, because I'm going to miss my friend. All right, let's do this. Let's take a break. We'll come back. Before we get to, if we have more stuff to talk about, we could do that, and then we'll get to the questions. This will be a little longer because it's an anniversary show, but I have to make my bladder gladder. So we're going to take a break and come back and continue with the show. So we'll be right back.
Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum, is housed in the historic Lutheran Seminary building constructed in 1832, a witness to the first day of battle. The museum's 3 floors of exhibits connect visitors to the dilemmas that led to the Civil War,
provide a powerful and personal view of the battle's first day, and explore one of the battlefield's largest hospitals. No visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center is complete without a guided tour of the building's famous cupola, where on the eve of battle, officers and civilians saw thousands of Confederate soldiers' campfires burning to the west, and Brigadier General John Buford watched for vital federal reinforcements as fighting erupted on the morning of July 1st. Today, you can stand where Buford stood and discover how this view helped chart the course of the Battle of Gettysburg. Your trip to Gettysburg is not complete without a serious visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum. Purchase tickets online at seminaryridgemuseum.org or call 717-339-1300. To get tickets or a cupola tour, listeners may call or walk in and mention Addressing Gettysburg, or by ordering online using the promo code AG1863 for 20% off. Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center. It began here.
There's a devil to pay.
Bo Brinkman is no stranger to Gettysburg, filmmaking, or this audience. An established Texas filmmaker, Bo has held the lead and supporting roles in television and film, including the 1993 film Gettysburg and its prequel Gods and Generals. Bo has written, produced, and directed several films, often drawing his characters and storylines from his ensemble of intricate comical and emotional family tales. The Last Mark, The Bay House, and Last Man Club are among his collection, with the latter winning Best of Show, Best of Picture, Best of Film, Best Narrative Feature, and Best Dramatic Feature. Now, 30 years after the release of Gettysburg, Bo returns to the same town for his next film, A Gettysburg Christmas, and he is looking forward to your assistance in bringing the film to life. Just go to GoFundMe.com and search for A Gettysburg Christmas, or click the link in the show notes and choose your level of support.
You've heard us promote various ways that you can help us keep the show going, but one way we haven't pushed too much is our sutlery at addressinggettysburg.com/shop. That's a shame, because we have designs over there by talented artists like Ty DeWitt of 1863 Designs and Mike Stretch of the Heritage Depot. So now we're promoting it. Buying shirts, hoodies, mugs, and other items from our sutlery not only helps us keep the lights on, but it also helps guys like Ty and Mike, and it helps spread the word about the show every time you wear an item or you sip from your mug. So head over to addressinggettysburg.com/shop and grab some merch. It's the perfect Christmas gift for the Gettys nerd in your family. That's addressinggettysburg.com/shop.
Our favorite bookstore in Gettysburg is For the Historian, located at 42 York Street. Isn't it, Eric?
You're darn tootin', Matt.
It's because they have the best selection of Civil War books in Gettysburg, both new and used, and online they have even more books to choose from.
But Matthew, what if the Civil War is simply not my thing?
Not a problem, my fine four-fendered friend. This is For the Historian, after all. They cover history from the ancient world to the 21st century with a strong selection of World War II and American Revolution books.
It's astounding how they squeeze thousands of titles from Osprey, Savas Beatty, UNC Press, and more into their store.
And it's also astounding how you and I both squeeze into our pants every day. Well, handsome, they have a warehouse too, and that's where they keep all those books that are available online at forthehistorian.com. And folks, if you go to forthehistorian.com now and order books until you're blue in the face, be sure you mention that you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg in the Note to Seller box, and they will refund your shipping costs.
What if I prefer to browse in the store and don't want to go online to get my book?
Great question, Doodlebug. Just mention Addressing Gettysburg at checkout, and they'll take 20% off the retail price of your item. So go to forthehistorian.com, stop by 42 York Street, or call 717-685-5207. That's forthehistorian.com or 717-685-5207.
Hey, Gettysburg business owners. Winter is just around the bend, and you know what that means. No tourists. But just because people aren't coming to you doesn't mean you can't bring your business to them. If you ship, you're still in the game. And if you're a seasonal business, the time to advertise for your next season is in the off-season when people are making their plans. So what's an affordable yet highly effective way of reaching those people? Well, it's not radio. It's not TV, and it's certainly not print. Step out of the Jurassic era of advertising and run an ad on Addressing Gettysburg. We just reached 1 million downloads, and we're growing by the tens of thousands every month. Beyond that, our audience is happy to support those who support their favorite podcast. So email sales@addressinggettysburg for more information about advertising on our show. We look forward to helping your business grow. That's sales@addressinggettysburg.com.
You're listening to the Addressing Gettysburg podcast with Matt Callery.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back with questions for Fran and Doug and Jared and maybe Bob, if Bob wants to answer them here. And these questions are submitted by some of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. If you'd like to submit questions for our guides to get answers and also get exclusive content that takes a closer look at all things Gettysburg, please consider joining us on Patreon today. That's patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. Okay, first one we have here. Well, actually, is there anything that we want to continue before we go on to the questions? I know we had said that before the break. Any other thoughts you want to add? Because I know I kind of abruptly went to the break there.
I got maybe one nugget, because it's this idea of how do you create something like this? Yes. And this might be also the problem that a lot of politicians have today, or leaders in general have today, but it's literally time to think. We have numerous occasions where Nikolai or Hay leaves Lincoln at the end of the day, and he just cracks the door, and there Lincoln will sit after the last visitor has been for like an hour. With his eyes, he says, "You almost close." It looks like his mind is anywhere, he's separated from his body, and he's literally in his mind turning over these ideas. And I think there's where we get some of those, an executive leader operating at the highest level in the crisis of a nation that still takes time to think, because these ideas are too important not to.
Yeah, okay, good.
Presidents
Jared,
think about ideas.
They did.
What a novel thought.
At one point they did, Bob. You got anything to add there, Jared?
No, I think that's a great thought.
All right, then we're going to go to, I think this is a new patron, or at least new to sending questions, in David Walsack, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Do we know the exact spot the speech was given? From my little knowledge, it appears to be in Evergreen Cemetery, but I do not know if the spot is known for sure or marked.
Yeah, we do. So there's photographic evidence, and it's actually two pieces of evidence. One, there is a photograph that's taken just as Lincoln is sitting down, and in the 1970s, a researcher in the Library of Congress was able to dial in, and eventually find the stage, and find some of the dignitaries on the stage. It's funny, now there's two candidates for who Lincoln might be in that photograph.
Yeah,
but the larger point being, we know where the stage is from that, right? And one of the things that is also in that photograph is the gatehouse of the Evergreen Cemetery. Yeah. There's another piece of evidence. One of the journalists, I believe he was from one of the Indianapolis papers, went out the night before the address, sketched the stage, and also sketched a couple of the tombstones that were in the cemetery. And so between those two things, we can pretty much triangulate it. And William Frasnito, the great photo historian of the Battle of Gettysburg, suggests that it is between, if you go into the Soldiers National Cemetery, go to the fence looking into Evergreen, and you locate the graves that say Yunt and Koch, that it is sort of between those two graves. Both are very close to that fence, just behind the big Soldiers Memorial.
And there's a gate there on the fence, so if you stand at the gate, you're almost looking right into it.
Why? So does the Park Service say we know where it is? Because I feel like I feel like the last time I looked at their website to answer that question, they were like, we're not sure. Yeah. But I heard about the photo with the gatehouse in it for a while ago. For a while, I've heard about that, and to me, that's like, okay, well, then they could figure out where it is. But why is the park kind of wishy-washy?
Well, because it's in the Evergreen Cemetery, which is the town cemetery, the private cemetery.
They don't want to send people in there.
Yeah, and not in a negative sort of way, but
yeah, they don't want people gawking at the private cemetery.
Yeah.
I understand.
I think that's probably some other rationale.
So that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah,
but we do. So for the record, though, we do know.
Yeah.
Not roughly, but basically where it was.
Yeah.
We can get where the platform
is. Yeah.
Absolutely.
12 by 28 or 32.
So there you go. So the mystery's solved.
Yeah, mystery is solved. And if you go to that location and you look back into the Soldiers National Cemetery, you pretend you're Lincoln on this 12 by 20 platform surrounded by 15,000 people. It makes sense where it's placed based on, how would they allow the largest number of people? What's kind of the flattest area that you,
right.
They're digging up the cemetery. They're already interring bodies.
Right. So you don't want people all over by that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. John Calcagni, he says, as we know, Lincoln said after the speech, that speech won't scour. The crowd politely clapped. It received negative press. When was the what is it? Sorry, it's the highlighting here. When was the time where the speech started taking on its iconic depth and meaning? So when did the speech actually start to not scour? Is it scour or scowl?
Scour.
Scour, okay.
Scour, yeah. It's the references to a plow on the frontier.
It won't
right?
dig in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. See, I don't know about that Ward Hill Lamon
references.
That Ward Hill Lamon quote is kind of interesting, and this idea again that Lincoln in the immediate aftermath thinks that he's failed. That idea largely comes from a fiction book called The Perfect Tribute, which is written by a New York woman named Mary Raymond Shipman Andrews.
Get one name, lady.
Jeez,
yeah.
Decide who you are.
Exactly. But it's 1905, 1906. It's in Scribner's. It's serialized, but then it becomes a book. And she's trying to write a reconciliationist narrative. And so she has Lincoln leaving Gettysburg feeling like he's failed, gets back to Washington, walks into a hospital, and there's a wounded Confederate. Of course, he's been blinded. This wounded Confederate who has read the president's words of the day before and wants to tell this visitor, who doesn't know who this visitor is, well, how fabulous those words were. And this is the person that makes Lincoln realize he hasn't failed. That's the story.
That was a movie.
Perfect Tribute. Yeah, it does become a movie as well.
A TV movie. I just watched that like a couple of months ago. Yeah. Somebody's like, oh, you should watch, because we were talking about crappy Civil War TV movies from the 80s.
Yeah.
And that was one of them. And I was like, I've never heard of this one.
So 1905, 500,000 copies of that book. It is the most widely dispersed Gettysburg Address story of all time. This is also the person that writes that Lincoln wrote it on the back of an envelope on the train on the way here to Gettysburg. Also not true. Speeches take a little more time than that, right, Doug? So it's really, so some of these myths start with that particular
book. On your average speech, Doug.
Yeah. Got to bring a whole box of them.
Have you ever written any on the back of an envelope or a napkin or anything? Ideas?
Some ideas have started on good bar napkins, yeah.
Yeah, of course. Good bar napkins. Of course, the cocktail napkins are great for that. I used to write songs on them.
But this question of, the immediate reception of the speech, it's all political.
Yeah.
So all of the Democratic papers say it was crap, and all the Republican papers say it was the best thing they've ever heard.
So what has changed? Nothing. Nothing has changed under the sun.
Something has changed.
What?
Things have gotten better, because in those days, 80% of the nation's papers were openly politically affiliated with one party or another. We think our press is partisan today. It is nothing compared to what it was at that time. But you have to keep that in mind. So can you go out and find a newspaper article that says this is the worst thing I've ever heard? Yes, you can. But is it genuine?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah. Right. Because it's a Democrat paper.
Yeah.
And so, of course, they have to say it sucks because they want their people to win the next election.
Right.
In Johnstown, we had the Johnstown Tribune. The Republican loved it. The Tribune Democrat, I think it was buried like in the middle of page 5 and all those little ads for castor oil and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your question about when did the Gettysburg Address start to rise, I would argue it's almost immediate, because what strikes me is when you look at the funeral eulogies that were preached for Abraham Lincoln when he died in 1865, so many of them will quote a line from the Gettysburg Address. They won't say this is from the Gettysburg Address, and yet it's clear they know their readers know those words, right? So the words, Ronald Reed did a study in the 1970s, 86% of the nation's newspapers carried the words of the Gettysburg Address within 2 weeks after it was delivered. The people are seeing the words. And so this idea that the Gettysburg Address wasn't really discovered until much later, the words were always before the people. And the reception, that's a partisan thing.
Okay.
Is it true that Edward Everett complimented him?
It is.
Right away?
Yeah. So Everett writes to him just a couple of days later, and there's a whole variety of things they talk about, and he does compliment him. That famous line, right? I hope I came as close to the central idea in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes, or something like that. If you read that whole letter, it seems like it's niceties more than it is an actual compliment. Like, it's kind of buried down there. It's sort of like what a man of class and would say to another.
But he's
person.
Fuming inside.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't even really think that. It's hard to. I think we can overemphasize that compliment sometimes.
Yeah. Doug, your chair is sinking. You could pull it up if you want. You look like somebody was cut off. Yeah,
Thanksgiving table.
Exactly. There you go. All right. Rick Scare says, I'm curious what Fran, Doug, and Jared think about Gary Will's argument that Lincoln's address is a pivotal moment in our collective understanding of America's purpose. Will said that the address reached back to the ideals found in the Declaration of Independence to reorient the nation's political outlook, which we talked about, kind of breaking the hold on our collective political psyche that the Constitution had exerted for so long. Do you think that's the case? If so, how successful was that shift in both the short and long term?
I think, for one thing, the speech, Lincoln doesn't know if this speech is going to do what he's intending it to do.
Right.
I think basically I tell people or young kids, I said, Lincoln is saying, this nation was founded on the principle that all men are created equal. And either it is or it isn't. Can't be both.
Right.
And I tell people sometimes when I read it, I sometimes think he's like hollering at us and saying, did you forget why we did it? So is it a political shift? I think we talked at the beginning. He's postulating that maybe it isn't true. So I think it helps define the nation.
So I think there's a multitude of documents. We talk about this a lot. We talk about how you develop a strategy at the Army War College, and it starts with enduring values and beliefs. And if you think about where we might get those as Americans, well, our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, his second inaugural. Personally, I'd go, if you give me FDR's Four Freedoms and Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream, it's the sum total of who we are as a people.
Yeah.
In that collective sense, they both repeat and refine who we are, what we fundamentally believe. This idea, all people are created equal. That's an absolute true statement. And from that, it cannot be debated. We move on from there.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it becomes one of those foundational documents upon which all other documents and flow, from which all our strategies and our interests are here on out in pursuit of.
When in doubt, go there. Does it fit there?
That doesn't rhyme.
The only thing I would sort of disagree with slightly with Will's in that interpretation is Will's calls the Gettysburg Address the greatest open-air sleight of hand trick in American history. This substitution of the Declaration as our founding moment instead of the Constitution. What Lincoln is actually trying to do, he has this in 1861, when he's on the way to be inaugurated, he's giving a speech in Philly on George Washington's birthday, and he is thinking about the founders. And he says this, I'm going to paraphrase essentially, but it's the apple of gold reference. And what he says is, we began as a nation with this apple of gold, the Declaration of Independence. And then in order to protect the apple, we put a frame, or he calls it a pitcher, of silver around it, right? The challenge over the years is that we've become so fixated on the frame, the Constitution, that we've lost sight of the apple of gold that is in the middle.
Yeah.
We've become so fixated on the rules and the laws that we've lost sight of that founding principle.
Right.
The challenge, Lincoln says, is not to get rid of the frame. If you do that, the apple's not protected. The challenge is to remember the proper place of the two.
Yeah.
You need the Constitution, but without the Declaration as providing that vision, what's the point?
Yeah.
And so it's the relationship between the two that Lincoln is trying to put back in its proper place.
I'd never heard that, but to me, the most important of the two documents has always been the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution, because the Declaration of Independence is what we believe. It's why we became our own country. That's, to me, the more sacred one. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, of course, the Constitution keeps the federal government in check, which is what's so beautiful about it. And you got to remember,
too, Lincoln's a lawyer, so everything he has done in his career has been based on the Constitution. He's not going to throw out the Constitution,
right?
But he is going to talk about the proper use of the Constitution.
Fair enough. Fran, you said something before. I don't remember exactly how you said it, but basically, Lincoln didn't know he had a hit on his hands, right? And in music or movies or any kind of entertainment, it's like people doing it. They're just doing it. They don't know that it's going to be, Jaws or that, the big, huge thing. As a speechwriter, Doug, did you ever write a speech and go, this is a hit, and he's going to deliver this, and people are going to love it?
So if I say yes, then I'm a braggart.
Pompous ass, yeah.
So I wrote mostly ones that did not scour. However, every now and then you write one, you go, this is the crowd, this one's going to land.
And it does it?
It's tight. Yep.
Yeah.
You know it. You just, the pieces, there's no fat in it. There's no, that's slop. Like that section's bad. We need to fix. Every now and then you get one that it just all fits together. One piece flows to the next. It's got funny. It's got, makes people laugh. It makes them cry. Every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really rare. Mostly you miss.
Right, yeah. Chaplain Cox says, great topic. My question is this. Does anyone know the text of the prayer that Chaplain Stockton gave at the dedication? I heard that there is testimony that the sky grew clear and the sun shone during his prayer, then went back to cloudy when he was done.
I think I remember seeing that in one of the reports. You know, the most extensive report you get of the dedication ceremonies comes in the New York Herald, and it's published the very next day, November 20th, and they make lots of allusions to the weather and some of those types of things. One thing you have to keep in mind with all of this reporting, Joseph Gilbert, who is essentially the AP writer that gives us the draft of the Gettysburg Address, and he corrects it against Lincoln's own transcript. But it's the one that goes out that basically everybody in the nation publishes, with almost very, very few exceptions. Gilbert is giving a speech before a Shorthand Reporters Association or something in 1900. And one of the things in the speech is he has 6 lines where breaks for applause. And Gilbert says later, I made all that up. I made up a lot of the stuff I reported. The applause breaks. He says, there was no applause. I just put it in later because that's where you would put these types of things.
Another good guide story shot. Yeah. Why do you keep inviting people who take our guide stories away?
Hold on a second, Bob. I've heard this before, and I'm hardly an expert on any of this. How did you not know that? Bob. Oh, Bob.
None of the
See, Bob always has
wasn't
his.
on the exam.
The 8th graders don't ask it either.
Bob's got this history on the show of having the myths that he's been telling as truths for 30 years just blown out of the water by somebody. Usually it's Tim Smith, but today it was you.
That's a high bar, so if we can get to Tim Smith level, we're doing all right. Yeah.
But okay, go ahead. Did you finish your answer?
Just we got to be careful when some of these descriptions, because they're clearly they're playing to their audience. The reporters are playing to their audience as well as the speechwriters.
That's perfect. Wasn't there also a claim that happened at his second inaugural too? That the sky opened and the sun came out and everything.
I'm not.
I swear that's in.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Ken Burns. I swear, I heard that, and I'm gonna have to go and check that today. But that's also, is that kind of just a Victorian thing?
Possibly.
Yeah. Because you see a lot of those paintings back there. There's always a beam of light coming through the clouds.
It's part of the Enlightenment. Yeah. Literally the Enlightenment.
Yeah. Okay. Brian Duranick says, in his address, Lincoln states, "The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, while it can never forget what they did here." In which Lincoln seems to infer his words will be forgotten to history. But can it be said that the Gettysburg Address, aside from the battlefield itself, is the most important means we have today of remembering the sacrifice of the fallen?
I would argue yes.
Yeah.
If we think about the big things here at Gettysburg, besides the size of the battle, the number of casualties, it's a turning point that Lincoln gives his Gettysburg Address, but it's the Gettysburg Address that is the piece that's most enduring. We think about where we are generations past. I think that's an accurate statement.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
to Doug's point earlier, especially when visitors come here, especially international visitors, they don't know anything about the battle, but they know about the address. 1978, during the Camp David Accords, when President Carter brought Begin and Sadat here, they toured the battlefield, and Sadat knew all about the battle. But they got to the cemetery, and Prime Minister Begin closed his eyes and recited the Gettysburg Address from memory.
Really?
He learned it as a young schoolboy in Israel.
Isn't
but
that
it's just, a evidence of what you were mentioning earlier.
It's quite interesting what both sides knew. That's all I'll say on that one. Okay, so that's it for the questions. We have all the questions there, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you guys for doing this. Fran, thank you. This is a great idea, so thank you for setting this up. Jared, thank you very much. Doug, thank you. Bob, great job on the camera, by the way. I've been noticing in the background here. Thank you very much for that. Don't forget, folks, if you want to ask questions on Ask a Guide, you got to be a patron, patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg. And don't forget this, too. Here, Bobby, you got the close-up of that there. The Long Shadow of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address by Jared Peatman. This is available on Amazon in softcover, right? The hardcover is out of print?
Yep.
Okay. And I'm going to get myself a copy of it today. Going to go and order it right after this. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Okay.
Need a Corps badge or other insignia for your uniform? Then check out the Badge Maker. Here's what some of his satisfied customers had to say. Miranda said, "I ordered an identification disc from Joe and it's fantastic. He hand-stamped it exactly as I wanted." Greg said, "My unit has purchased from him in the past, quality badges and good service." And Jerry S. says, "The Badge Maker is the go-to place for accurate replica Civil War badges. So go to CivilWarCorpsBadges.com and attach a message with your order saying you heard about him on Addressing Gettysburg."
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, forsooth 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead from Gary Owen and Glory. Instead of Spa, who took it down